Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. We are reporting from Mobile World Congress in Barcelona 2014. It's day one, it's Monday the 24th of February, and I'm talking with Miguel Moreira, who is the MD of the Cloud and Data Center Unit of PT, Portugal Telecom as was. Miguel, it's great to see you again. The last time we met was at the opening of your fabulous new data center in Covilhã in Portugal. I've got to ask you to begin with, how's that going? Because it's a beautiful building.
Well, it's going very well. I mean, we're starting to have the first customers in there. Obviously, it's a big engineering building, and it takes time to do last details. But we're very positive on the, first of all, the interest that is generated, and for us, as you have seen, was a big statement towards being a big player on this ICT market. We are a company that always believed that we need to set up state-of-the-art infrastructure and then build services on top of that. We have done that on the B2C, on the transformation from a typical communications company to a entertainment company, and now on B2B we're aiming to do the same thing by having such a strong investment and strong state-of-the-art infrastructure.
When I was at Covilhã, I interviewed Zainal Bava, the CEO, who spends now a lot of his time in Brazil looking after Oi, as I understand it, some 2/3 of his time. But he said something very interesting to me. As far as your business consumer work is concerned, he said, PT is no longer a telco, it's an entertainment company. I understand that. What about in the business-to-business context, which you're more involved with? What transformation is taking place there, and how far along the road are you?
We see that as a tremendous opportunity, and it was a big transformation we had to do to tackle the way that B2B is consuming technology, the way we see it. I think it's all about convergence, but this time is convergence between computation and communications. I think there's we see three main drivers behind this movement that has evolved very strongly in the last 4 or 5 years, but I would say dramatically in the last 2 years. One of them is connectivity, because new generation networks have become such a commodity, and now state-of-the-art communications and connectivity is available to most of the companies, especially in the Western world. The second driver is mobility, because the explosion of smartphones and the use of mobility now makes it the preferential access to systems that consumers have. And when I say consumers, as persons, but also as business users, because the smartphone as an access point to business applications is now inevitable, and it's a great opportunity to increase productivity. The way we see it is that mobility is a big driver for a central computation versus a local computation. The third element of it is what we call virtualization. It's the evolvement of technology that have become made available, that you can access technology in small chunks with flexibility, with agility, without the upfront payment and the upfront investment that was on the old model. So we see these three elements combined, which is connectivity, mobility, and virtualization, as a big transformation towards the way that companies, corporations, both large corporations and SMBs, can use technology. And we see ourselves anticipating that move, anticipating that transition, and setting up a proper infrastructure of connectivity, and in this case computation with our data centers, to actually being able to lead the markets where we are operating with that offering.
You talk about connectivity, Miguel. These days that is so ubiquitous as to be almost a commodity. Does that make life more difficult, or is it actually an opportunity to capitalize on it?
I think it's a great opportunity, because from a user perspective, it's got the preference. I mean, the way that the user, for example, some of statistics that we have seen, that about 83% of the consumers that use an app they prefer to use the app versus the website. So this is something really strong towards the preference of business consumers to actually use apps. So I think it's a great accelerator of computation, and that's a great accelerator of using also ICT and cloud.
In different parts of the world, I know we'll talk about Brazil in a moment, but I know you're partially focusing on areas, geographies where you're traditionally strong for all sorts of reasons. But look at the number of devices people now have. In Western Europe, for example, in North America. I know that other developing nations may be slightly further behind on this, but they're going to catch up. And I think the measure at the moment is something like 3.4 devices per person in Europe. What does that mean to PT?
Well, I think it's great news, first of all because we're a strong mobile operator and this drives obviously a lot of consumption, but beyond that we see that it presents new challenges to computation because technically I don't think it's feasible anymore to maintain a full synchronization when you use 3.5 devices per consumer. It's virtually impossible to have the same information in all of the devices in a way that the consumer wants to use them. You notice that that number most likely is going to double. The forecasts show in about 3 years. There's likely to double, to use twice as much the number of devices, and that's even would make it tougher. So you need to go for a central point of computation, and cloud computing is the answer for that.
Let's talk about your plans for the future. PT Portugal Telecom, as we keep saying was a traditional operator, landline operator, in the old-fashioned way of things, in the way that many places in Europe were, many organizations in Europe were, rather slow to react, quite old-fashioned, quite conservative with a small c. You've changed that completely. How difficult was it to drive through the cultural changes necessary, as well as the technology changes, to enable that transformation?
Well, it's a great question because it has been a great challenge, I think, not only for us but for all the telcos, because the way we have to behave in this new world, in this ICT market, is quite different because also the competitors are different and the consumers are requiring an agility, a speed to react that it's quite significantly different than the traditional way that we operate. So both from a technical side as from a cultural side has been a big challenge. What we have done was anticipation, because we saw this transition coming a couple of years ago on the B2C. We're seeing it coming on the B2B nowadays, and what we are doing is a strategy of deploying state-of-the-art infrastructure and going through also an organization and cultural change to be able to address and to compete with the new competitors, because when you talk about internet age companies, which are the new competitors in this ICT world.
A final question to you, because we're running out of time, and I know you're a busy man at this show, as everybody else is. What message are you bringing to Barcelona and to Mobile World Congress 2014?
Well, this is a new world for us, but I think we have set up the right investments, both from an organization and from an infrastructure and technology perspective, to actually aim to lead in the geographies where we operate. I mean, we're very focused on Portugal and Brazil, and we aim to lead ICT on those two regions. And the remaining geographies where we focus, Africa and the remaining of South America, and even in south of Europe, we aim towards being a strong player and to have a very competitive offering to our customers.
Miguel Moreira, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.